or welcome back to my channel. If you're new here today, my name is Odds, and I am joined by my lovely online friend, Kit. And we're going to be talking about Pride and exciting stuff like that. So we don't have a specific roadmap of exactly what we're going to talk about. So this is kind of going to be all over the place, as I imagine most of my videos are a little bit all over the place. But yeah, I think just to have a discussion here for those of you who don't know, because I know a few years I had come out as bisexual, but 2 years ago I had realized that I am a lesbian. So this is going to be a lesbian video, and Kit is also a lesbian, and we'll tell you a little bit more about their journey and identification, because there's a lot of stuff that goes on. I feel, especially, I mean, with everybody, but I feel especially with lesbians, there's a lot of gender stuff that gets thrown in there too. So we're
absolutely.
So you want to just introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, I can introduce myself. Like Odd said, my name is Kit. I am a lesbian. I'm an ace lesbian, and I'm non-binary, so I go by they, them pronouns. And my journey to finding out that I'm a lesbian has been long and arduous. I'm 23, and I just recently realized that I was a lesbian during quarantine, which I guess is like the one benefit of that time at home.
Oh, I know. I feel like it's been great. I mean, there's been this big joke that you started when you went into quarantine, you started with one set of pronouns and then you came out with another. And I have to say, for me, that's accurate.
Same.
Right. I think a lot of people, I don't particularly share this with, honestly, this is probably, other than Twitter, this is going to be the first time I really say anything, but I have realized in terms of the gender identity aspect that I identify as bigender, which I know a lot of people would be like, what? Well, I tend to not tell people because I appear more feminine.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't necessarily, I mean, bigender falls under the non-binary spectrum. I don't necessarily feel like I can identify as being non-binary, although literally if you're not
binary,
you're non-binary. But to me, I was like, I don't know about that, you know. I always felt like, and this is the horrible thing, because there's the stereotype of the non-binary is just that it's the other gender. So if you're not binary, then you're this other random third gender, which is totally not what it is. But I always felt like I was multiple at the same time. So I identify as bigender, meaning that you can encapsulate multiple genders at the same time by meaning two. So I'm bi something, which
you were there. You had the energy. It was just misplaced.
It was not sexuality. It was gender. So I realized that these, and we could talk about Comphet, of course.
Comphet is.
I realized these men that I thought I was attracted to, I wanted to be. So that kind of influenced me being my gender a lot, because I always identified as, you know, I can be very feminine, but at the same time, I also feel very much like a very androgynous 70s man. Like if you see a man from the 70s,
absolutely,
that's how I feel. So like men, there are men that would dress like this in the 70s. I mean, obviously you get David Bowie, which I think for a lot of non-binary people too, David Bowie, Prince, a lot of just very androgynous men from that era. But that's kind of, I thought I was attracted to them. No.
I had a similar experience. I don't think I had a lot of gender envy for the guys that I dated. I think it was like a combination of I tried to pick men that were like unattainable, and then they somehow became attainable anyway, and then I was just like stuck in relationships with them. That happened to me like 3 times. um, my biggest example of that is I was actually engaged when I was 19 to a man, and then like 4 months before we were supposed to get married, I broke up with him out of nowhere for no reason.
Oh my god, it was I watched was it Bly Manor? Was it Bly Manor? She was like in that relationship, and then the actress came out and she was like, she's not a lesbian. I'm like,
I used to feel really bad for that, but he kind of sucked, so I don't think he deserved. I think he deserved that.
I mean, like,
I really feel you with like the gender crisis thing though, because I think me figuring out that I was non-binary was like really paramount to me figuring out that I was a lesbian. Because like I make jokes all the time about my gender just being a lesbian now, like all the time, no gender, just lesbian. I think that's like a really like integral part of lesbianism is like gender non-confirmation. At least it is like for my personal experience. Because I think if you remove yourself so holistically from the male gaze, you kind of like inherently are like stripping yourself of some facet of womanhood, which I think was just like it was necessary for me to like figure out that I was not a woman to figure out that I was a lesbian.
right. I think a lot of people, that's where a lot of people kind of, I know there's this whole thing, I won't just necessarily just say with TERFs, but I think with the feminist movement in general, is that they then get very annoyed by that. But I mean, it is mostly TERFs, but because if you do, I took women's studies in college, which is really funny. It was never a class I wanted to take because I knew it was going to be the complete white feminism thing. Surprisingly, yeah. It was not. It was we actually did work to make sure all voices were heard, and it was like a very inclusive class. But you realize definitions, Google definitions, whatever, their definitions, things change all the time, which I think is important. But the definitions of when you're we're talking about what is it to be a woman, and then either you're giving biological, so female attributes, which then don't correspond with trans women who either haven't transitioned or will never transition because it's very expensive surgery. Or then it's you have children, and even if it was not to bear children, if you're talking about the reproductive side of female too, it's it means that you bear children and you do this. So I think ultimately, even when a layer out of it, even when you are heterosexual and you're not going to have kids, I know there's a huge disconnect for women for that reason. So I do think that there's an issue. I mean, I think a lot of people identify with this just because our ideas of being a woman are very much ingrained in being in a heterosexual relationship as a mother. And as much as people would argue in the feminist movement that that's not true, it really is.
Womanhood, especially like white womanhood, has always been centered around motherhood, motherhood to white children. And so if you take even one step out of that box, then you're going to feel like you don't align with womanhood. And I don't mean to say that you can't identify with as a woman and not fit the definition, but I do think it's a catalyst for a lot of people in realizing that they aren't a woman in general. For me, I feel like gender is really just an opt-in, opt-out process. There are days where I feel kind of like a woman, but most of the time I just kind of feel like I'm existing in a meat sack and just trying to survive.
I think and I think there's another thing another thing that really disconnects lesbians specifically from womanhood is that aside from the mother aspect, the other really big aspect, especially of womanhood and like the more modern feminist movement is sexual liberation.
Yeah.
Great, but the sexual liberation of womanhood is exclusively to heterosexuals, like to relationships. I mean, I love so many artists that deem themselves feminists, but it's all their like feminist anthem songs are about sex with men, and I'm like,
yeah. I feel very disconnected from sexual liberation as like an asexual person, because there's like a lot of stereotypes about ace people that were like prudes and like we're just like very shy and like virginal, and that's just not true. I have like a lot of respect for like I have a lot of respect for like the sexual empowerment movement, but I also think that it's very like surface level and kind of shallow, because like there are minority groups like women of color and like lesbians for whom sexual empowerment is really just fetishization. It's just like a direct line to that. And then for someone like me who is fetishized and also does not like experience sexual attraction in any capacity, it's like a double whammy.
No, yeah, that's like obviously that's a whole different point too, because I think there's a lot of people too. I mean, there are stereotypes about lesbians that we can break down for.
Yeah, it could be like a laundry list.
Yes, I feel that's the biggest issue. We have mildly successfully bullied a lot of corporations into including our flag and things, but oh my God, I knew that things were I like that it was gonna be annoying. Like, I hate to say it, but every time I love Pride, don't get me wrong, but part of me every time it rolls around is like, I am just not looking forward.
I dread it.
Yeah.
I've never had a good experience at Pride. When I was out as like a bisexual, I tried to like go to Pride events, and it was always just like you could really just tell it wasn't for like other people. It was really just for like, especially like corporate Pride, or like big family friendly Pride events are very white centered, which is why I hazard to go to family friendly gay events in general, because I think it tends to reinforce a lot of like not so great biases. But it's just never been great. And I appreciate Pride in the online sense, and I appreciate Pride as a protest. I'm not super invested in Pride as like a celebration. Because I feel like it's celebrating things that I don't feel a connection to, if that makes sense.
Yes, that's very fair. There are known celebrity lesbians out in the world, yet they're doing all these Pride events, and they're almost always sponsored by corporations, and there is not a single lesbian that they have as a guest. Not a single one. I saw some ad yesterday, and it was like, for something, they're gonna have Demi Lovato there, and Troye Sivan, and some British pop gay white man, and I think like Trixie Mattel, who is I know drag. That's my other thing, is that people need to understand, and I don't know anything about like Trixie Mattel or anything, but being a drag queen does not necessarily mean that you're a part of the LGBT.
Oh my God, no, absolutely. There's like there is so many, like there are bio queens that are just like cishet women. There's a huge factor of the drag scene that is just cis men, cishet men that just like, it's just dress up. You don't have to be gay to play dress up as a woman, or as like an ideal of femininity. And that was always something that I have felt very bitter about, is the inclusion of drag before the inclusion of like femme-aligned queer identities. Mm-hmm. Like I've always been very bitter about that.
I have very probably controversial opinions about drag queens. So I'm not sure if I'll go like fully into that. I just think it's pretty telling when drag queens are so popular, like with like RuPaul's Drag Race, and obviously RuPaul's very transphobic, except that he's not, and he supports trains.
Yeah, no, he's not transphobic. It's fine.
So RuPaul had been called out for being transphobic, and he said he made a tweet that that Drag Race has always been inclusive, and he posted a picture of somebody had made a trains flag.
No, so I think it's truly like a cultural like milestone.
So it's very funny, but my point is, I think it's very telling that everybody is obsessed with drag queens, but I never hear anything about drag kings.
No, I have also very controversial opinions about the popularization of drag. At least I think the drag scene as it exists naturally is really important. I think that like it's a very like proactive, safe space for queer people, and I think that's very important. I think that the popularization of drag has been kind of harmful, especially through like RuPaul, who is an extremely problematic person, and a lot of the people that he has platformed are extremely problematic. Especially considering the popularization of drag has made it seem like it's something that only cis gay men do, and I think that is completely like disingenuous to what like the actual drag scene is. And especially a lot of the people that are platformed on RuPaul's Drag Race are like performing these like kind of misogynistic depictions of women, which I don't love. I think drag is cool, and I think it's like a very important aspect of queer culture, but I do think that it's a little telling when cis gay men get dressed up and put on big boobs and big butts and like pretend to be stupid and like slutty. I think that's just like a little telling, you know?
No, I mean, I think because there is a big issue too with misogyny, especially in the gay community, and I know a lot of people who think they can get past it because they're gay, so they get a pass to hate women.
Yeah.
And obviously all that to say, it's not everybody, so don't get
just some
stereotyping some people, because I take everybody, I accept everybody here. It's just in the aspect of like there's patterns that I've noticed, I've picked up on 100%. But I think it's important, and I think it's important to note too that I feel like a lot of the gender thing, a lot of people are acting like this is a new thing, but it's not. Another thing, if I had taken a few anthropology classes in college, and you realize that other cultures have multiple genders.
Yeah.
Especially Native Americans here on our home front, a lot of Asian countries either did or still do. I know Thailand has something like 20 different gender categories.
Yeah, and even in the Torah, it depicts 6 different gender classifications in the original translation. The gender binary, like a rigid gender binary of man and woman, is absolutely just like a result of white colonialism. And I also have like been really interested in that in college. I take a lot of cultural classes because I'm from a very small town in the South. And so I didn't have a lot of like natural interaction with varying cultures. So I'm trying to like counteractively learn as much as I can in school. But yeah, it's super interesting. It was actually super interesting to like discover that it really just is like white Europeans that believe in like a rigid gender binary historically. It's kind of disappointing to see that that's become the mainstream, the norm, because it's so, there's not people like claim that it's based off of like a sex binary, but there's no sex binary. Intersex people exist, and there are like super there's a bunch of different ways for people to be intersex. Right. It's really frustrating. But
yeah.
Yep, sorry.
No, if you had a point and I cut you off, I'm sorry. I can't.
No, it's okay. I sometimes just keep talking for forever.
Well, I can't. I have to speak. So that's how I have to be speaking. I don't know. I have so many thoughts, I need to say. But oh my god, and I can. Oh, what I was gonna say is that I think, like, and of course, I think there is. I mean, we have homophobic people. A lot of their thing is that it's being shoved in their face and blah blah blah. But I think the thing is, homophobic people, transphobic people, they're gonna always be that way. You're not gonna
Right.
condemn them. You're just not. I mean, if somebody's like younger and maybe they're saying things that they're picking up on and they don't genuinely understand, you might be able to do it. But if they're like 60 years old and they vehemently you, you're not going to convert them. So I just think though that, like, of course we make a big deal out of Pride. Of course we do. But if you made none of this stuff a big deal, if you gave people a lot of the, like, if you gave trans people rights, if you stopped emphasizing gender and sexuality to the point in, well, I would say mostly in laws and in society, I don't think people would really be caring that much. Like, that's the thing, is that we wouldn't make a big deal out of it. Not that you should be ashamed of anything.
Right. But it would just become like a natural like aspect of life.
So I think that the reason that, I mean, these homophobes think that people were shoving things in their face is because we have to be closeted in either gender or in sexuality. And then when we have like the month that we're not, or whatever, in areas that are more accepting, then it's like we have to make a bigger deal out of it. But if you treat it like it's not a big deal in laws, then it's not going to be a big deal in society. Because, like I said, these other countries and other nations have this, and it's not a big deal. Like, if you look at Native, I mean, and I think the thing is that we are really not told about Native culture in general. But I feel like if you look at Native culture, I think the first thing that people would not notice the gender differentiations.
Yeah.
I don't sit here. I think most people, even if they identify in the binary, don't sit and think about, how am I a man today? How do I do this? Like, no one thinks about it because it's not a big deal to them. So if it's not a big deal to everybody, then.
Yeah, I think the only reason that I have a very, like, I agree with you fully. I think the only reason that like people I think the only reason that like people are so vocally anti-gender, or like non-binary people are so like aggressive about the way that they perceive their gender, is because gender is like, in the gender binary is enforced so rigidly upon us, and so it's just like a rubber band effect. And you're right, like if laws were made to include us, if like society had adapted to accommodate us, I don't think that like people would be as rabid about it. And the reason it's just like it's a rational response to being oppressed. And if the oppression were to suddenly disappear, and liberation was granted, then it would just become like a natural state of our being. And it's also really frustrating because the people who are like, oh, you're shoving it down our throats, are like only ever saying that when I mention like having a girlfriend, or being like correcting them on my pronouns. That's not shoving it down your throat. That's me like just talking about the things that I am and the things that I experience. I think you're absolutely right to a certain degree. I don't really believe in like educating homophobes. I think I'm willing to educate ignorant people that are like trying their best to an extent, especially if it's something that like only I can have an effect on. So like my family, I try very actively to like educate my family, just because like I have an impact on their lives more so than I could like random strangers on the internet. So I try to do as much good as I can. But like all in all, if like someone's homophobic to me, I'm more likely to just cut them out of my life than I would be to like try to educate them. I am not a super proponent on educating the ignorant. I'm a bigger proponent on just bullying them out of spaces.
I more so mean people. I don't sit and educate people because I can't do that. It's exhausting.
Yeah.
My biggest thing is typically if I see somebody who's saying something messy, I will usually, and if it's almost always on Twitter, is of course.
Yeah.
So I usually like message them and be like, hey, this is this, and that. If they're like seemingly willing to figure out what they did, then that's fine. I think it's like if you're saying something that's completely terrible,
Right, like a slur or
right?
something like objectively awful.
I have, it's so funny how I've come around on things because I used to be extremely confused by he, him lesbians. And the stuff that I remember I had said was more so like out of confusion. There are
Right.
people who don't understand, but then at the same time are still nasty about it. And it's
Right.
at that point it's not worth even trying to educate them on that.
I also didn't understand he him lesbians, but the reason I didn't understand he him lesbians is because I just thought it was like a trans man situation, like a scenario like that, and that's why I was just confused. But like as soon as it was explained to me, I was like, oh, that makes sense. I like you can't know everything, and especially if you come from like a community that I come from, which is like pretty sheltered, pretty small southern like white town. It's natural that you're not going to be like naturally exposed to like the different microcosms of the queer community. I think the like, and even like online, like the queer spaces are like so much different than they are in like real life. There's a lot of things that I still don't super understand, but I've gotten a lot better at like realizing that I don't need to understand everything.
Yes.
Like I think that's the biggest the biggest realization I've had is just that like, oh, some things are not meant for me to grasp.
Well, that's my thing too. I think my policy always is, you know, I might not understand everything and whatnot. I can, maybe if I'm like close to the person, I can ask like certain questions, but I, you know, like really think about your questions before you ask somebody something. And obviously, like I think it's important that you know the person before you start doing
Right. You can't just be asking strangers on the internet for emotional labor.
Just respecting other people. I might not understand anything, but if you tell me, like this is what I want to be called, this is what I identify as, I'll be like, okay, like I will.
Yeah, it's so easy to like. You don't have to like. Understanding is not a prerequisite for respect. I like. I have never gotten that. That's like the mindset of homophobia and transphobia that just doesn't make sense to me. Is that like their driving rationale is, well, I don't get it, so I'm not respecting it. Like I don't get heterosexuals. I don't get cis people, and you don't see me out here like telling them that they're not real and that they don't exist. I'm super autistic, which is I think why it took me so long to figure out that I was not a woman, because I really didn't know what being a woman was, so I just kind of like adhered to the default. And for the longest time, I still don't understand the way that non-autistic people view gender, and I will never understand the way that non-autistic people view gender. But on the other hand, they will like never get the way that I experience gender, and they will never understand the way that gender affects me personally. And I think that that's kind of beautiful. I think it's kind of cool that gender and sexuality can be this like deeply personal, unique experience. I don't think that it has to be understood by everyone around you. I think it's kind of cool when it's not.
Yes. I think it's really important that I think people really need to see that we're not a set of stereotypes. And I know every specific sexuality has stereotypes, and it's because of homophobes. And that's the reason that stereotypes are a big thing. And I mean, I'll be honest, some lesbian stereotypes I find funny, but not like the.
Yeah, like I think the angry lesbian stereotype is funny because I'm an angry lesbian, but like.
I mean, I think there's like really important things to note. Like there's not every lesbian is either butch or femme, but at the
Right.
same time, there's nothing wrong with any of those identities. And I think the idea a lot, I mean, the biggest thing and what I never understood before I identified as a lesbian, and I don't really identify with either of those identifications within lesbianism, was that, oh well, they're just pretending to be a heterosexual couple, which no,
Yeah,
not
no.
true at all.
Those are just two non-men. You can't.
I've seen a butch and femme in public, or I thought in New York I would see a lot of studs in public with their girlfriends. You're never mistaking them for a man.
No,
They're
there's
very
something.
obviously lesbians. But at the same time, I mean, I think at a point back in the day, yes, they did used to mask themselves as
Yeah,
man and woman because it was what they had to do. But at this,
right, with the survival technique.
it's just how some lesbians like to express themselves. Like some lesbians are more masculine, and I think that's the thing. Is with me, I feel like I can be both at the same time, which I know
Yeah,
that's where I think a lot of other non-binary lesbians feel very much the same way. And I think that's really important. And also, you can be a butch or femme and still be non-binary. There's
yeah,
lots of
absolutely. I know a lot of butch lesbians. Like I have a lot of mutuals that are butch lesbians that like will like make jokes about how their gender is just being butch, and I think that that's really cool. I think like the history of lesbianism is so interesting. I really like watching videos of like old butches talk and like tell their experiences of growing up visibly queer in a time where like being visibly queer was super dangerous. I love hearing about that because it's like very empowering. I think it's so cool that they like made it that far, you know. I there are so many lesbian stereotypes that like I think it took me a really long time to figure out I was a lesbian because of just like the sheer amount of like stereotypes about them that like you have like such an idea of what a lesbian is in your head until you like enter these queer spaces and interact with more than like a good couple of dozen of them. And then you're just kind of like, oh no, these are just people, and the only thing we all have in common is a label. um
I think the big stereotypes that I would remember is mean, hyper masculine, hypersexual. I mean,
God, yeah.
stereotype of
Wait, hold on. I have a story about that. I get like acrylic nails all the time because I'm like super high femme. And every time since coming out as a lesbian, every time I like get like long nails, because I make TikToks, there's someone in my comments being like, why do you have long nails and you're a lesbian? Why do you think that you are entitled to my like details of my sex life, first of all? Second of all, what? Do you think that there's how entitled are you?
I no, that's a say. Yeah, that's obviously another stereotype is that there's nothing going on in the nail department. Which for me, I'm just lazy. Like I don't do my nails. I do sometimes. I also just don't like the way acrylics feel. It's nothing to do.
That's super fair.
The thing is, it's like I feel like with LGBT in general, and I know a lot of trans people, this is a huge thing, and this goes into asking uncomfortable questions when you don't really know people that well, is we get bombarded and asked about sex life all the time. There's always questions about how lesbians have sex and all this sort of stuff. You can like figure it out. You don't need to ask somebody about it. Also, like maybe Pornhub's not a great reference because like none of those women are actually lesbians. They're
right.
Just
also, why do you want to know so much about lesbian sex? Are you planning on having lesbian sex? If not, what does it matter to you?
Are you looking for tips? Like
like are you looking for advice? Because I can't help you, but at least that makes more sense.
I just it's just the way to be completely invasive. So I just remember that was the thing, and I think with lesbianism too, it's like it's those stereotypes, or it's just a porn category. And
yeah, I think there's also like the U-Haul lesbian stereotype that like we have like commitment issues and love bombing and all of that. there's like the stereotypes that like I think lesbians are like man-hating and like aggressive, like misandrists. And I think it all really stems from like an attempt to either hyper-feminize lesbians or completely defeminize lesbians, which kind of ties back to what we were talking about earlier, where like lesbians like inherently exist outside of like the definition of womanhood. And so I guess to like in an attempt to like make sense of lesbians, society kind of tries to like enforce different types of gender roles onto us. Either we're women who are men really, or we're just ugly women. That's how we are perceived.
Yes, I know. Like lesbians are stereotyped to be ugly. I'm sorry, neither of us are ugly.
No, I've never met an ugly, like I've met ugly like turfy lesbians, but like every like nice lesbian I have met is like beautiful.
Well, I know.
It took me a really long time to realize I was a lesbian because of like the stereotypes of them being like hypersexual, and even like depictions in media that are not fetishizing still like center sexual relationships over romantic relationships, like the L word. And just like a lot of canon lesbians are very hypersexualized. And so it took me a really long time, and I had to figure out that I was ace, and that was difficult because being ace is like really highly stigmatized. Like there are people who genuinely don't believe that we exist or that we're suffering from some weird mental illness that has just made us like touch averse. And I'm not touch averse. I just don't find people sexy. That's it. Like I still like kissing people. I still like holding hands. That's where it ends. But I think being like an ace lesbian is very interesting, because it kind of is like a really good way of like weeding out ill-intentioned lesbians, if that makes sense. Yeah. You just kind of like, it's like a good litmus test. Am I talking to a TERF? Am I talking to a predatory lesbian? Let's find out. Yeah. But I will say, I think it's a very interesting experience, because I'm like doubly removed from womanhood, but I'm also still like actively perceived as a woman in like a lot of spaces. And I don't super mind that. I just don't. It's not something that I super care about. But it is interesting because like, it's just, lesbianism has been something that is so freeing for me personally, and like discovering this about myself and like finding community online through like being a lesbian, and like having like, I've never been more accepted in my entire life. And I was out as ace for like 2 years before I came out as a lesbian, and being an ace bisexual was much worse. People were like super weird about it all the time. For some reason it was like, oh, how do you like, other bisexual people would be like, how are you attracted to two genders and then also not attracted to any? They just didn't get it. But like all of non-binary lesbians I've interacted with just have like gotten it. They like just understand, or even if they don't understand, it doesn't matter. Yeah. And I think that's like my favorite part of like being in the lesbian community. Again, excluding like the TERFs, they're over there somewhere. But like it's just something about like lesbians, just they're so nice and accepting, and they just get it. They get like the minutia, the differing like aspects of lesbianism, how it differs from people to people. I've never had a lesbian shame me for being asexual in the way that I've had gay men shame me for being asexual, or bi people shame me for being asexual. And that's like, it's just been great. It's been awesome.
I think we benefit from not having sexual added to the end of our name, just because that's a pretty big issue, which is, obviously to that extent. But no, like I mean, I felt like most lesbians are extremely accepting. I was a little bit nervous to state even online that I was bigender, because at that point I was like, well, then I don't want to be like, can I even include it as a lesbian? Because,
yeah.
But I mean, the other gender is not man, so then yes, but like if it was by gender where it was like man woman, then absolutely not. You could not be a lesbian if you were identifying as a man. So I mean, I think that's like one of the other big things. But I feel like a big thing too, we should also still focus to decenter Stonewall at this point, because it's not the center of liberation for everybody, but at the same time it was partially started by Stormy oh my god, I can't really say his last name, De Larverie. I think that's how you say his last name. Which he was a drag queen, drag king, butch, he, him, lesbian. So, just so you know, Marsha and Sylvia Rivera were not there. They are very important, but they're not there.
I think Stonewall has really just become like I don't know what people are talking about when they like throw the word Stonewall around, but like you can just tell that they've like done no research.
I had to read, oh my god, I had to read about Stonewall for a class, and I remember reading and being like, where's Marsha? Where's Sylvia? They're not mentioned at all. At all. They were not there. No,
and they were like huge activists and like super influential to like what we like have rights today because of, but like they weren't at every rally, they weren't at every event, they like were people and they had other things to do.
Right. Also at the time, I think Sylvia was a minor, so like that was a huge thing too, like
yeah,
able to
no, I think Stonewall is just like it's become like a corporate attempt to like just use a buzzword and be like, oh, we know queer history, but like you know, like one event and you don't really know that event in detail. You just know that it exists.
Oh, I know. Yes. I mean, I've not been inside, I've been outside there, and there's like a nice park and everything like that. And I think if you're in New York during Pride Month, definitely go around Stonewall. You'll see actual protests there rather than Pride, the Pride Parade.
Pride protests are like my preferred method of celebrating Pride.
I enjoyed the Pride Parade when I went in New York, but it ended with a pretty not great experience with the NYPD, which is just ironic. This is what our flag looks like.
Yeah! Lesbianism.
Use the right flag.
Please use the sunset flag. Please do not use the red one.
Don't call us lipstick lesbians. Don't use the one that's varying shades of pink and red. And it was started by Emily Gwen 3 years ago. I think it was 3 years.
So, yeah, it's crazy. When I found out that the sunset flag has only existed for like 3 years, that like punched me in the face. I feel like it's existed my entire life.
Yes. This includes trans, non-binary lesbians, Black lesbians, other lesbians of color, Indigenous lesbians. So don't use the other one. We don't just use the rainbow flag. The rainbow flag is for everybody. There's lots of different flags. I see flag posts that either the lesbian one is not included, it's the wrong one, there's a not accurate description.
I saw a flag post and the lesbian flag was upside down, which was just weird.
I don't really understand the lesbian flag not being included in things. I just really don't. I
saw someone
L is the first letter.
Yeah, and like letter. That's intentional. That's like an act of solidarity from the community. Like yeah. It's not like an it's not like an arbitrary placement. Like
you put us first.
Yeah, they were like, hell yeah, thanks for helping us not die and showing solidarity. Here is a placement in the acronym. And it was and
I think that's where the video. Yes, this is a video about Pride and about being a lesbian, and it's very exciting, and I'm very happy to be in this community myself.
Same.
I know it's kind of going out of fashion, but I'll be quite honest, the lesbian master doc was super helpful for me.
Oh my god, same. I read that and then I found out what Comphet was and I had like a crisis for a week. like a full week.
So like that's super awesome if you're kind of trying to figure things out. It's always okay to explore different identities in sexuality and in gender, and you will never be, there might be some shitty people, but you will never be shamed to, you identified this way one time, like that you're indecisive or anything like that. That will never happen. So we will always accept you no matter what your identity is, as long as you're not impacting somebody else's identity. That's a little bit different. But thank you so much for watching. Kit, if you would like to plug anything, you can plug it.
Follow me on TikTok. My @ is Kitty Pride. I could message you so you spell it correctly.
Yes, I'll put it on the screen so it'll.
Cool. Thanks.
Okay, cool. And then, as always, please subscribe.
Yeah.
And I have no idea when I plan to put this video up, but I do 2 videos a week, so I will see you in my next one. Thank you for watching.
Bye.